Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark, and we are in 1 Peter chapter 1, starting at verse 9. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them. And thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now remember, verses 6 through 9 deal with the purpose of Christian suffering. And we're now in verse 9. But before we get into verse 9, verse 8 says, whom having not seen ye love, in whom though now ye see him not, yet believing, you rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory. And then he says in verse 9, receiving the end of your faith, even the salvation of your souls. And this Greek word for receiving is komizomenoi, and it's present tense and it's middle voice. And present tense means that they were right now, at this moment, they were doing the receiving. And middle voice means that they actively exercised their faith, and they were also at the same time receiving the benefits of exercising their faith. And what is it that they were receiving? The salvation of their souls. So Peter here says that they were receiving the end of their faith. They were right now, at this time, exercising faith. And at the same time that they were exercising their faith, they were receiving the benefits of exercising their faith. Remember, middle voice means that you produce the action of the verb and you also receive the action of the verb. You produce and receive the action of that verb. Okay? So, they were producing faith, and they were receiving the benefits of that producing the faith. All right? So, remember, it's present tense. So the salvation that they were experiencing wasn't just a future salvation into heaven, but also a present salvation during their time of suffering. So they were receiving the end of their faith, the salvation of their souls. Salvation means deliverance, and it's present tense. And Peter here says that you were at that moment, in the midst of their suffering, they were receiving a deliverance from that suffering. The unspeakable joy and the peace that these believers had in a difficult time in their Christian lives caused them to experience a deliverance and a freedom from all that was happening around them. And, you know, that's a beautiful thing for every Christian, is that this is a tremendous picture of how a Christian can live his life in the midst of sufferings and trials. That while we are in the trial, we can have a heart filled with unspeakable joy and full of glory. That we can have a deliverance, a salvation in our hearts while we are going through the trial. And that's beautiful, because it means that we don't have to receive all the negativity from without. And we don't have to be in bondage to this world system and the projections of this world system. We can be dead to this world. Yes, we're in this world. We work and we live and we eat and we function in this world, but we can be dead to this world. And this is the beauty of the Christian life, is that by faith we can live in this world as being dead people, not affected by you walk up to a dead person and start yelling at them, cursing at them, telling them they're ugly or whatever. Are they going to react? No. Why? Because they're dead, right? Well, as Christians, we also can be dead to this world system. And regardless of what's happening around her, regardless of the pressures that come upon our life, we can approach this world system as being dead to it, but being alive unto God. As a Christian, as a citizen of heaven, with a new king and a new home, we look forward to the time when we will be united with our glorified bodies in a new heaven and a new earth. But as a citizen of heaven, right now, we can live in this world being delivered daily from all the effects of what is going on around us. And that's the beauty of this lesson, is that while we're in this world, we can be delivered daily from all that's going on around us. We have a secure, purified, strong faith in God that's not shaken by this world system. But we trust that God will be faithful to us through his word and through his promises. By faith, we can experience a daily salvation, not just a final salvation. Yes, it's referring to a final salvation, but it's also referring to a daily salvation. When Peter uses the present tense, he's talking about a present salvation that we can enjoy right now, that we have access to right now. Not just a future salvation, yes, but a daily, present day salvation from all the trials, all the things going on in this world. Okay? And then he says in verse 10, of which salvation the prophets have inquired and searched diligently, who prophesied of the grace that should come unto you. And here it says, of which salvation the prophets. Now, there is no definite article before the word prophets in the Greek text. So, therefore, it's referring to all of the Old Testament prophets as a whole. So when you read this, it says, of which salvation the prophets. It could kind of give you the idea that he's talking about certain prophets of the Old Testament, but that's not true. He's talking about all of the prophets of the Old Testament. And he says, they have inquired. Now, the Greek word for inquired is exeteo, and it means to seek something out, to search after something. So these Old Testament prophets were seeking something. They were searching for something. And he says here, they have inquired and searched diligently. Now, this Greek word is exeruno, and ek means out. And this prefix ek strengthens the word, strengthens this Greek word, and it means to search very diligently. It means to search closely, very intricate search. So these prophets were prophesying of something that was going to happen in the future, and they knew it was going to happen in the future. Okay? And they knew that it wasn't for their time, but it was a future time that God was prophesying through them. And therefore, they were trying to search very diligently and eagerly of the time that this would happen. All right? And he says here, they would search diligently, who prophesied of what? They were prophesying of the grace that should come unto you, unto us today. So the Old Testament prophets were prophesying of a grace that would come in a future time. Now, the Jewish believers that Peter is writing to would have a much better understanding of what Peter is trying to say. Ever since the time of Moses, the Jewish nation only knew of one thing, and that was the law. From the time of Moses until the time Christ came, there was only one thing that the Jewish believers, that the Jewish nation knew of, and that was the law. And they believed that their relationship to God was through that law. The Jews, seeing God as a gracious God, was not part of their understanding. In the Old Testament, there were glimpses or snapshots of the grace of God in people's lives. David, for example, it seems like David was a New Testament believer in the Old Testament. There were things that David did that were not lawful for him to do. But God allowed it because he was a man after God's own heart. And God gave David grace because David really and deeply loved God. There were things that David did that it was not lawful for him to do, even though he was the king. There were things that he should have been put to death by the law because he did those things. He took the showbread from off the candlestick, but from off the table of showbread. He took the showbread off of that and ate it, and the men that were with him. That was not lawful for him to do. He shouldn't have done that. But yet God, because he was a man after God's own heart, God, if you want to say overlooked it, or God gave him grace, that's what we're talking about. But David was a man who exhibited the grace of God during a time in history when God was known through the law. And here, he says here that these prophets, they searched diligently. They inquired of God. They wanted to know from God, when will this grace come? And they pleaded with God, and they searched the scriptures. They searched their own prophecies, and they searched other prophecies, and to try to determine the time when it would come. But it wasn't revealed unto them. And we'll see that here in a little bit, but it wasn't revealed unto them the exact time of when this grace would come unto them. But we'll see that here in a little bit. All right, next lesson, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.